A lab-created virus spread through a dog and a woman immune to its effects, but lethal to anyone she encounters. If she isn't stopped before crossing the border, the virus will spread uncontrollably, leaving no one safe. The movie begins with a woman named Jessica, who is on the run. She sneaks into her house, washes the blood off her face, changes her clothes, and takes her fiancé's wedding ring. Soon she realizes the armed men chasing her have already arrived. Acting quickly, she climbs out the window, steals a hoodie from a nearby craftsman, and hides in the back of a stranger's pickup truck to escape. At the same time, we meet Elsa Gray, who works at a detective agency. Her colleague, Raymond Reed, informs her that a corporation has hired them to deal with a serious situation, and they have just 36 hours to capture the target before it crosses the Canadian border. Meanwhile, the pickup truck driver stops at a restroom. Jessica takes the opportunity to grab his cookies and a map before slipping away. She studies the map, finds her route, and ventures into the woods. After walking for some time, she reaches a house. That night, as she lies down, she recalls the fear she felt when she was locked in a cell. After a while, Jessica sneaks into a barn and steals a can of soup. However, she's caught by the house's owner, Frank. Instead of being angry, Frank surprises her by inviting her to dinner, which his wife, Janie, has prepared. Janie watches with a smile as Jessica devours the food and even suggests she take a shower before leaving. Jessica agrees, but only uses the opportunity to take some medication she needs. She then tells them she has to leave, but Janie insists that Frank drive Jessica to her destination, teasing him about finally doing something useful. Jessica asks Frank to take her to the border. She also asks why he and his wife are helping her. Frank explains that their country values freedom, and he doesn't want to stand in the way of that. During the ride, Jessica falls asleep, but she wakes up at night when they reach their destination. She decides to continue on foot. Frank gives her a backpack with warm clothes and canned food and advises her to be careful. Back at home, Elsa faces her own struggles. She twists her leg due to her sclerosis, a condition she hides from her colleagues and family. Meanwhile, Jessica stops in the woods to eat and reflects on a past hike with her fiancé, Ian. During the hike, they encountered a stray dog, but despite Ian's objections, Jessica decided to feed and warm the dog by their fire. Determined to keep going, Elsa begins using a cane for balance. She talks to Vince on the phone and looks at photos of Jessica, Ian, and the dog at the campsite. Jessica finally arrives at a small border town. She enters a bar and asks for a job. Molly, the owner's assistant, initially says they don't need anyone, but she eventually hires her as a cleaner. That evening, while washing dishes, Jessica remembers the blisters she and Ian discovered on their skins after their hike and suspected the dog was the source of the infection. Her memories are interrupted when Molly confronts her about the bruise on her face and asks why she's running. Jessica lies, saying she's escaping her boyfriend, and Molly shares her own experience with an abusive, drunken husband. Later, as they finish work, Molly offers Jessica a place to stay, knowing her tips won't be enough to afford a hotel. Jessica gratefully accepts, though her journey is far from over. Meanwhile, Elsa gets a call from a doctor at the local hospital. The doctor explains that Frank's wife, Janie, has been brought in with a severe coughing fit. Concerned, Elsa heads to Frank's house, wearing a protective radiation suit. She informs Frank and Janie that they've been exposed to a girl carrying a mysterious virus. Elsa finds Janie inside, acting like a zombie. When both Frank and Janie attack Elsa, she pulls out a weapon and kills them, as they have become violent, infected creatures. At the same time, Jessica remembers how her fiancé, Ian, started coughing shortly after touching the infected dog. His blisters grew larger and changed in appearance. When Jessica called for help, the paramedics took them not to a hospital, but to a strange facility. There, Jessica was blindfolded, separated from Ian, and locked in a cell. Realizing no one intended to release her, Jessica planned an escape. Elsa, frustrated, contacts Raymond and demands answers about what Jessica is really infected with. Raymond admits that their agency was hired by a pharmaceutical tech company that works with the government. He explains that the virus originally came from an experimental dog that escaped the lab. The scientists didn't have time to fully study the disease or create a vaccine. Somehow, the virus mutated in Jessica's body, making her a unique carrier. She somehow isn't harmed by the virus, but anyone she comes into contact with becomes infected. Because of this, Jessica is considered a valuable object that must be returned to the lab at any cost. Furious and exhausted, Elsa refuses to continue the mission, reminding Raymond that she has sclerosis. Raymond coldly admits he already knew, and specifically gave her the case because a lonely, terminally ill employee was better suited for such a dangerous job. The next morning, Jessica knocks on Molly's door, saying she's heading to the store. However, Molly is unable to respond because she's coughing violently, showing signs of infection. Meanwhile, Elsa's assistant Vince finds a video of Jessica at a bar using facial recognition software, and Elsa decides to investigate the bar herself. On her way there, Elsa sees Jessica standing by a window. Jessica notices her and quickly tries to escape. During the chase, Elsa collapses and loses sight of Jessica. Jessica hurries back to Molly's house and finds Molly dead, infected with the deadly virus. But Molly, who has turned into an aggressive zombie, suddenly attacks her. After a brief struggle, Jessica manages to kill her by hitting her head with a frying pan. However, Jessica notices her own hair starting to fall out, indicating she may be affected as well. Meanwhile, Vince discovers Molly's address and realizes that Jessica had been hiding there. Elsa arrives at the house and finds Molly's lifeless body. She eventually confronts Jessica in another room and tells her that she is the carrier of a deadly virus. While the virus doesn't harm Jessica, it devastates anyone around her. Jessica denies this, showing Elsa the marks on her head and insisting she's just a victim in this situation. She refuses to go back to the lab and in desperation tries to attack Elsa. Elsa defends herself by stabbing Jessica in the stomach. Despite her injury, Jessica tries to flee toward the border. Elsa, determined to stop her, shoots Jessica in the leg. Jessica, now wounded and helpless, pleads with Elsa, saying she's not guilty of anything and only wants to live freely. Elsa, however, reminds her of the people who have died because of her and insists that Jessica must return to the lab to stop the virus from spreading further.
You can't run from this.
Jessica refuses to comply, and Elsa is forced to shoot her in the head. She then approaches Jessica's lifeless body, sits beside her, takes her hand, and looks out toward the border, overwhelmed by the tragic outcome. Later, Elsa meets with her psychologist. He reassures her that her life with sclerosis isn't over and that there's still hope for good things to come. However, their session is abruptly interrupted when the psychologist begins to cough violently.